Brace yourselves, folks, because tonight we're diving into the deep end of biblical absurdity with the tale of Jesus walking on water. Which, let's be honest, is either the greatest plot twist since God decided to set the whole planet spinning, or just a seriously overqualified LinkedIn recommendation for a guy who was really good at calm seas. In Jesus Walks on Water, a quiet miracle, we're peering through the foggy haze of history and faith to examine one of the most celebrated strolls in human storytelling. Yes, it's a miracle that has somehow flown under the radar like a misplaced shoelace on a yacht. Now, if you think the best part of this narrative is the supernatural feat itself, think again. We'll uncover just how desperately the disciples needed saving, huddled in a boat like a bunch of traumatized cats with no plan for survival. Add in the drama of intense weather, waves threatening to turn their seaworthy vessel into a bobbing cork, and you can practically hear the ticking of divine inspiration as Jesus sauntered out into the turmoil, serenely ignoring the laws of nature to deliver some good old-fashioned reassurance. But hold on to your sandals, dear viewers. This isn't just a tale of a calming presence amid chaos. We'll flirt with the absurdities of the human condition, the comedy lurking beneath the surface of steadfast faith, and the historical perspective of looking at miracles through a skeptical lens that questions, was this a divine intervention, cosmic interference, or just a really, really good publicity stunt? Imagine the marketing team behind such an event. Hey, let's get a few boats, a camera crew, and a miraculous figure who can turn a thunderstorm into a performance art piece. And lest we forget, we'll poke fun at some absurd extras, like the possible post-walking questions from the crew. So, Jesus, what's your takeaway on crossing those choppy waters? As if self-help book recommendations were still a thing back then. Spoiler, it might not have been in the denomination of pesos. So join us as we splash through not just the water, but the expansive ocean of interpretations and misgivings that surround this biblical event. Where faith is like a life jacket, at some point you just have to trust it won't sink and leave you flailing. Stay tuned, because this is a deep dive into faith that you won't want to miss. The storms may be fierce, but with humor and a little historical take, you're in for a ride smoother than a lake at dawn, even if the evening air is crisp, tinged with the smell of fresh fish, and a suspicious hint of charred wood smoke from a failed campfire attempt nearby. Around 40 disciples lounge on the shore, probably cramping from all that sitting and waiting for a sign, yawn ready and clutching leftovers of yesterday's bread like it's a Michelin star appetizer. Peter's nervously eyeballing the water, which, thanks to a sudden breeze, is doing that unsettling thing where ripples look like nature's version of a "please don't drown me" sign. The boat, a modest wooden plank with the structural integrity of a wet tissue, bobs gently in the waves as if it's trying to meditate through the chaos. The food of the hour? Well, it's not on the menu, but if curiosity had a flavor, it'd be the dryness of fish crackers discarded on the shore, the true villains of this aquatic adventure. Nobody talks about it, but somewhere behind the scenes, fish crackers might be considered the original betrayal snack. Tensions rise rapidly, not from biblical prophecy or epic sermonizing, but from the sheer impracticality of walking on a liquid surface that was, until recently, infamous for causing very ungraceful splashes and general wetness. The disciples whisper superstitions that float faster than the waves. Maybe the water's cursed by some ancient sea god, or Is this some new form of crowd control? Meanwhile, Peter tries to summon the courage to imitate Jesus, which, spoiler alert, is about as effective as trying to DIY your own resurrection. The climax? A splash so loud it probably scared a few nearby frogs into early retirement. Peter's grand idea to walk on water turns into an unplanned baptism that no one asked for. Jesus, ever the serene showman, helps him up with a look that probably said, "Next time, try water shoes." Kindness, miracles, and soggy sandals all rolled into one quiet moment that history decided to upscale into divine folklore. A bit of fun historical context. Walking on water has been a staple in mythologies far older than first-century Palestine. In fact, some scholars argue it was just an impressive early form of performance art involving cleverly hidden stones and a surprisingly tolerant aquatic ecosystem. So, what's the takeaway from this soggy little episode? Sometimes, when life's waves get rough, it's not about miracles or faith. It's about knowing when to duck, swim, and maybe just accept that fish crackers are a terrible snack near water. The air is thick with the salty spray of the lake, mingled with the faint scent of fish guts and the musk of panicked disciples. The sky groans ominously, dark clouds brooding, as if God himself is debating whether to grab the popcorn or intervene. The boat, packed tighter than a Jerusalem market on festival day, creaks under the weight of expectant and slightly seasick followers. Peter, the unofficial spokesperson for bad decisions, fidgets nervously, casting dubious glances at the restless waters. Then their 27s, Jesus, calm, collected, and apparently immune to maritime laws. Tonight, 27s, food of choice. Faith served with a side of bewildered disbelief. The disciples feast on hope, but the menu is thin, and anxiety is the only appetizer everyone sevens sure of. Superstitions run rampant. One disciple swears he spotted a water demon doing synchronized swimming just beneath the waves. Another insists the ripples spell out doom in ancient fisherman Ivanen's code. To counteract this, they perform a ritual so absurd it belongs in the annals of historical comedy. Peter is encouraged to step out and actually try to walk on the water. This trial is less of a faith exercise and more a test of how long one can pretend before face-planting into a very wet death. Peter 27's attempt is borderline heroic until the inevitable happens. His confidence lapses, and down he goes, flailing like a fish out of water, a painfully ironic image. The entire boat falls silent, not from spiritual reverence, but from sheer collective awkwardness. Jesus calmly extends a hand, segregating himself from the chaos with an aura of supernatural being there. Done that nonchalance. Here sevens the twist. This miracle, far from the grand spectacle later depicted in stained glass, was likely a quiet, confused moment in the middle of a stormy night that baffled everyone on board. Some scholars suggest the whole thing could have been a collective hallucination, induced by seasickness and late-night fish stew. Historically speaking, the idea of walking on water stands as an allegory for faith over fear, but our sarcastic take reveals it as perhaps the earliest recorded instance of peer pressure gone divine. It 27's, the ancient equivalent of trying to impress your friends by doing something everyone secretly knows will end in tears and soggy tunics. So what do we take away from this aquatic adventure? always be wary when your spiritual leader suggests impromptu waterside stunts after a dinner of questionable fish. The year is approximately 30 CE, the place the turbulent waters of the Sea of Galilee, and the absurdity of the moment is as thick as the morning fog over the lake. Imagine a modest crowd of fishermen, disciples, and curious onlookers who just came expecting fish and ended up getting celestial footwork instead. The sun lazily slaps the waves with golden paint as if to spotlight this aquatic spectacle. The salty breeze carries a smorgasbord of smells, fishy, fresh, and the faintest hint of sandalwood from the sandals that never quite touch the water. The disciples, our ragtag cast of soon-to-be miracle witnesses, shuffle nervously, their sandals flapping against the rocky shore. Among them, Peter, already auditioning for his role as the World Nine, as a most confused water walker, squints at the horizon as if the next miracle might be hiding behind a cloud or a suspiciously large fish. The food of the hour, surprisingly, is not fish but faith itself, intangible, invisible, yet oddly filling. Meanwhile, the water serves as an unwitting stage for the greatest zero-calorie miracle in history. Tension ripples through the air like a badly thrown stone, skipping twice and sinking. The disciples whisper rituals to summon courage, touching the hem of a probably muddy garment, quietly reciting prayers that might confuse a linguist, and nervously avoiding eye contact with the waves. Legend had it that water wasn't nine, just for walking on, but also for tripping up any would-be miracle workers. On the sidelines, rumors swirl that Jesus brought a special pair of sandals blessed by a waterproof cobbler, or perhaps borrowed from Neptune himself. Others speculate it was an elaborate magic trick involving cleverly concealed lily pads and enthusiastic fishes. The grand climax unfolds with Jesus stepping boldly onto the water, his feet defying every known law of physics, causality, and common sense. Applause is absent, replaced instead with gasps, and the urgent scribbling of early gospel writers wondering how to explain the logistics. But here comes the twist. While all eyes are on Jesus, Peter, inspired or decaffeinated, tries to join in but promptly starts sinking. It turns out walking on water requires more than faith. It demands some serious balance, or perhaps swimming lessons missed by the disciples. Historical context nudges its head in to remind us this story served as a powerful message of faith and doubt in an era with zero entertainment options beyond fish stories and parables. And of course, walking on water quickly became a favorite anecdote in the ancient version of dinner parties and campfires. So what 9? The takeaway from this splashy saga: never underestimate the power of walking on water as a quiet miracle. But also remember that sometimes even the calmest picture this: a foggy morning on the Sea of Galilee, circa 30 AD, where the water is as calm as a philosopher's temper, but the fish are having an existential crisis. Jesus and his crew have just finished a sermon that made waves, literally, and now it's time for supper. The air is thick with the scent of fish sauce, olive oil, and the unmistakable aroma of damp splinters from poorly made fishing boats. Enter Andrew, Peter, and the rest, who look less like seasoned fishermen and more like a ragtag band of miracle hopefuls, each clutching nets that have seen better days and probably harbor unofficial generations of fishy tales. Front and center in this aquatic drama is the humble fish, a staple so central to their diet even the Romans found it suspicious. This is no ordinary fish. Today's catch has a pedigree of myth, superstition, and enough slippery lore to make it the aquatic equivalent of a Kardashian. As the sun inches up, the fishermen perform their ancient rites, which include rhythmic tapping on the boat hulls to encourage fish migration, whispering what can only be described as fishy pep talks, and the occasional sacrifice of a wooden figurine fashioned in the likeness of Neptune to ward off bad luck. In this blend of faith, lore, and sheer desperation, every splash can be mistaken for a divine sign or an ill omen. Tensions rise as the nets come up empty again and again. The sea, it seems, is staging its own silent protest. Suddenly, Jesus rises calmly, steps onto the rippling surface with all the grace of a man who clearly skipped leg day but not faith day, and walks toward the shore. The fishermen blink, wondering if the morning's fish shortage was just a setup for this quiet miracle. Surprisingly, when the nets are finally drawn, they teem with a catch so plentiful it seems almost absurd, nearly as if the fish were reluctant performers waiting for Jesus' cue. The irony is delicious. Those who doubted the fish suddenly find themselves swimming in abundance, while the sea remains eerily still, save for the footsteps of one very improbable water walker. Historically, walking on water is noted less for biological possibility and more for its morale-boosting potential among early disciples. And no fish were harmed, only mildly confused. And the moral of the story: if you ever find yourself stranded on a lake with just humble fish to eat, remember, sometimes the miracle isn't about defying physics, but picture this. Early 1st century Judea, the Sea of Galilee, glistening under a suspiciously bright sun that looks like it's trying way too hard to highlight the upcoming miracle. The air carries a subtle mix of fish, sandals, and the vague aroma of unwashed philosopher. Enter Jesus and his band of merry disciples, mud-caked, overworked, and debatably underfed. Just finishing a dinner that was, let's say, less than gourmet. Plain old fish and bread, the original fast food combo of antiquity. The scene is dimly lit by a lazy moon, the water gently buzzing like an ancient coffee shop filled with whispers of upcoming chaos and divine stunts. The disciples, still digesting grievous puns about loaves and fishes, are the picture of exhaustion mixed with hopeful anticipation. And the sea? Well, it's behaving itself for once, only casually rippling in what one might call the prelude to aquatic absurdity. Now, here's where things get spicy, or at least slippery. Walking on water? In 30 AD, this was less about miraculous powers and more about the distinct possibility of drowning, or, at best, a very awkward wet robe. Legend suggests Jesus stepped onto the waves in a confident stride, but historical records, that is, nearly zero reliable ones, imply that water might have been shallower, or maybe there was a cleverly hidden sandbar, or that all involved had a shared hallucination after too much fermented grape juice at dinner. Every ritual in this tale screams of the era's quirky relationship with nature and the divine. Water wasn't just wet, it was a divine boundary, a liquid no-man's land where humans were discouraged from trespassing lest Poseidon himself throw a tantrum. To cross it on foot? Blasphemy, or clearly a PR stunt in ancient terms. Add in the superstitions about spirits inhabiting the depths, and you get a scenario ripe for panic, astonishment, or a bunch of fishermen reporting what might have been a mirage. But here's the twist. Jesus wasn't out to start a circus act. He was sending a message wrapped in the soft splash of his steps, the whispered promise that even nature's laws bow to intent and belief. The disciples' terror at an unexpected reality clash turned into awe. Or at least that's what the storytellers wanted us to believe, while also subtly hinting that faith will often do the walking for you when logic has left the dock. Historically, walking on water remains the supreme metaphor for faith-trumping physics, much like medieval alchemists turning lead into gold, or Renaissance painters turning everyday religious figures into early selfie enthusiasts. It's less about the literal and more about the splashy symbolism, served with a side of irony and a drizzle of ancient narrative license. So what's the takeaway here? Picture this. Approximately 33 AD, somewhere on the foggy shores of the Sea of Galilee, where the local fish are less interested in swimming and more obsessed with snapping selfies of their reflections in the water. The air smells faintly like water lilies, and the lingering scent of campaign speeches about compassion. Jesus and his disciples are gathered, probably debating which one of them forgot to bring lunch again, when suddenly a miracle interrupts the eternal snack hunt. The setting is lit by the soft glow of dawn, with waves gently lapping, breaking the poetic serenity with a splash or two, likely fish expressing their disbelief. The sky carries the fresh, salty hint of potential and mild bewilderment. Jesus, the charismatic carpenter turned messianic figure with a penchant for dramatic entrances, stands confidently by the water's edge. His disciples, a ragtag crew who've yet to master the art of staying dry, eye the lake nervously, as if it might decide to swallow them whole. And the food? Not the fish from the nets, but the metaphorical loaf of bread that symbolizes far more than just snacks. A feast of faith is in play. Now tensions rise. Walking on water isn't just an aquatic party trick. It's the ultimate sign of divine street cred. The disciples cling to their superstitions and scientific skepticism, whispering about legendary fish curses and water spirits who might dip their fins in the proceedings. Rituals include carefully avoiding stepping on lily pads, believed to anger the local water sprites, and an elaborate blessing of the sandals, because wet feet are apparently worse than hungry stomachs. Just when the moment is at its peak, Jesus steps onto the water's surface, the ripples momentarily freezing like a paparazzi's flashbulbs, capturing his every move. The disciples gasp, mouths agape, some scrambling to find words, others wondering if they just witnessed aquatic levitation or an elaborate stage trick. The fish, meanwhile, reportedly organize an underwater summit, the sole agenda earmarked, "Hey, who invited this guy?" In an unexpected twist, it turns out that the fish aren't actually jealous or plotting mutiny. The miracle was as subtle as a quiet sip of water after thirst. Jesus, walking on water, doesn't unleash tidal waves or prompt fish protests, but quietly boosts morale and reassures his followers that maybe, just maybe, faith can move mountains, or at least prevent soggy sandals. Historically speaking, water-walking anecdotes are not confined to Christian scripture. Many ancient cultures boast similar tales, most likely inspired by particularly athletic frogs or bored philosophers on vacation. But it's the quiet drama here that turns the trick into a legendary tale, less about spectacle, more about the gentle nudging of belief. So, what's the takeaway? If you ever find yourself doubting your abilities, remember the humble fish reaction, quietly confused but ultimately unbothered, and maybe consider a new pair of waterproof sandals. Picture this: the Lake of Galilee. Nighttime. The waves are lapping against a wooden boat so old it probably had a retirement plan. The stars twinkle ominously, like ancient paparazzi just waiting for a miracle to happen. Jesus and his disciples are aboard, but not for a nature hike. No, tonight we're about to witness one of history's quietest miracles, one that almost went unnoticed thanks to the mediocre lighting and general Byzantine weather conditions. The air smells of salty fish, soaked tunics, and the faintest trace of sandalwood incense, nearly overpowered by the unmistakable scent of panic. Meet Jesus, charismatic carpenter turned public figure, and his motley crew of disciples, each blessed with varying degrees of sea legs, mostly none. At the center of this aquatic drama, not the water, not the storm, but a simple wooden boat that everyone is gripping like it's the last falafel in Jerusalem. As the lake's waves slap the sides, tension rises from the squishy, swampy smell of ancient footwear. But wait. The true absurdity lies in the fact that the whole scene hinges on one man attempting not just to defy nautical logic, but basic physics. Walking on water, an act so quietly miraculous it could be mistaken for a casual stroll. Now, if you think this was a spontaneous divine stunt, you'd be wrong. This was theater under the stars, scripted with such subtlety it almost slipped past the history books. Watch as Jesus steps from the boat onto the lake's surface, his sandals sparking no ripples, or at least none visible to the naked eye, because ancient cinematography was a bit low-res. Meanwhile, the disciples' faces oscillate between awe, confusion, and some serious attempts to not keel over on a tiny wooden vessel. Surrounding rituals? Oh yes. Expect a brief moment of confused whispers about faith, a dash of superstition on whether walking gods can be squid bait, and a quick prayer that no one brought sacrificial fish this time. The tension? Palpable enough to turn the water to wine, if only somebody had the right idea. But here's the twist. Rather than a grand spectacle, what actually happened might just be Jesus stepping into a calm patch of water shallow enough to support a sturdy gate. A quiet miracle, indeed. More like a quiet fluke. Historical context? Walking on water has reverberated as a metaphor for the impossible, but scholars argue it might be less about defying physics and more about good timing and very shallow waters. Modern historians still debate whether it was divine intervention or a clever pun on ancient geography. So here you have it. A lesson for the ages. Never underestimate the power of perspective, lighting, and a well-timed step. Because sometimes miracles are less about bending the universe and more about careful navigation. And always remember, when in doubt, just blame the fog or the fishes. Because even picture this, a moonlit Sea of Galilee, circa 1st century CE, where sandals are out, and walking on water is the new fitness craze. The air is damp with the scent of salt, fish, and a faint aroma of hallelujahs from a distant campfire choir. Enter Jesus, the man, the myth, the soon-to-be aquatic trendsetter, casually stepping across waves like they were just very flat rocks. The scene is bathed in a cinematic glow, moonlight reflecting off gentle ripples, with a choir of crickets providing an ambient soundtrack that even the most dedicated Franciscan monks would approve. Nearby, the disciples huddle in a wooden boat, their expressions ranging from utterly baffled to mildly impressed, clutching oars like they were about to row into a sitcom rather than a miracle. Central to this aquatic absurdity is the humble fish, swimming below, completely unaware that it's about to witness not merely a miracle, but a PR stunt for millennia to come. Around them, the water smells less like miracle and more like a briny fisherman's wet boots, with the occasional splash punctuating the silence. Tension ripples through the scene. The disciples squint suspiciously, wondering if this is a clever trick involving cleverly hidden stepping stones, or perhaps some divine Photoshop. One disciple fiddles nervously with his beard, recalling bizarre local superstitions that say if you miss a step on water, you get cursed with eternal soggy feet. Ancient water-walking rituals, as it turns out, involve not only faith, but also precisely 3 prayers: a brave soul willing to override natural laws, and a generous serving of patience mostly on the parts of the walkers waiting for the others to stop screaming. Just as the disciples brace themselves for the climax, a splash, a shout, a wet miracle gone wildly wrong. Jesus does the unthinkable. He actually walks on water, navigating the waves with the confidence of a man who knows his sandals are made for more than just dusty roads. The twist? This miracle, immortalized in stained glass and Sunday sermons, was probably the first recorded viral moment long before social media existed. Word spread faster than a jar of pickled fish at a Roman banquet. Suddenly, water walking was the conversation starter at every campfire, beach, and lakefront. Historically speaking, the story also conveniently omits the fact that the Sea of Galilee was essentially a pond prone to occasional gusts of wind and local pranksters, making walking on water slightly less miraculous if you consider the well-placed stepping stones theory. So, what is the moral of this watery episode? When life throws you waves, just walk over them, preferably with the confidence of a miracle, the skepticism of a disciple, and the waterproof sandals of legend. Because sometimes, all you need to start a global legend is to keep your feet dry and your story even drier. Picture this: 1st century. Somewhere on the Sea of Galilee, under a sky so dramatic, it has paparazzi angling for divine selfies. The moonlight hits the water just right, creating the kind of shimmering runway that would make Fashion Week envious. Yet, here we are, about to witness the most suspiciously low-key miracle in religious history. The scene is wet, windy, and apparently very slippery. Jesus, the soon-to-be legendary carpenter turned miracle worker, has just wrapped up a sermon so packed with parables it would make a modern TED Talk look like a nursery rhyme recital. The disciples, a motley crew, including a fisherman with trust issues and a tax collector with a questionable poker face, are pressed for time. Dinner waits. Not just any dinner, a modest, soggy spread of fish and bread, the heiress equivalent of fast food, but with more sand. The air is a cocktail of evening dew, the faint scent of charcoal from a nearby fire, and something that might be fermenting, either religious fervor or the smell of Peter's neglected sandals. But here comes the twist. As the storm kicks up, Jesus makes his move. No drum roll, no heavenly choir, just a guy casually stepping out onto the water like it's a paved walkway. The disciples blink. Some stifle giggles, others panic. After all, who is allowed to defy the laws of physics before coffee? Historically speaking, walking on water was about as common as a vegan at a Roman banquet. It sparked debates among the disciples about whether Jesus was a prophet, a lunatic, or simply showed off because he knew no one left their sandals on the shore. Fishermen nearby supposedly rubbed their eyes, wondering if the catch was just a fish story or had gotten a sprinkle of divine seasoning. Meanwhile, the disciples' trust in their leader improved just slightly, the way you might trust a weatherman who once predicted sunny skies after a hurricane. But wait, there's more irony. The miracle itself was barely remarked upon in the grander narrative. No epic statues, no annual festivals of water walking, just a quiet nod and a lot of lifelong questions about wet sandals and waterproof robes. In reality, scholars suggest this story might stem from either creative storytelling or an exaggerated report from the boat's less-than-sober night watch. Or perhaps a clever early PR move to boost Jesus' legendary status without causing mass seasickness. So what's the takeaway from walking on water? Circa 30 AD, if you ever feel like you're drowning in your problems, just remember. It might be less about defying nature and more about confidently stepping out before anyone else gets a chance to call you out. And picture this. It's roughly 30 AD, somewhere near the Sea of Galilee, and the moon is out, casting a calm silver glow over the water. So calm, it resembles a giant mirrored patio rather than a body of water with any real concern for physics or pedestrian safety. Enter Jesus, who, contrary to all reasonable biological expectations, decides tonight's footwear is waterproof legs. Yes, in an act that would baffle both sandals and splash zones for centuries, our protagonist chooses to walk across this aquatic stretch as if it were just a particularly wet street in Nazareth. The atmosphere is thick with the smell of fresh fish likely caught moments earlier, since fishing was the local side hustle, and the faintest hint of sandals rubbed raw from days of wandering. The night air buzzes with the curious chatter of disciples, some whispering prayers, others speculating whether Jesus is simply testing new sandals or forever breaking neighborhood norms. Lanterns flicker on boats bobbing gently, their crews staring wide-eyed, trying simultaneously to look complementarily astonished while not spilling their nighttime catch. Jesus, draped in a robe that suspiciously looks drier than physics would allow, steps lightly, his feet skimming the surface as if he had secretly replaced water with a magic invisible bridge. The disciples' reactions range from awe to mild panic, as they calculate odds that this is either a miracle or a very elaborate magic trick worthy of the ages, or at least a decent Circle of Magicians show. Meanwhile, the fish underground, well, underwater, are decidedly unimpressed. As per the local superstitions circulating among early 1st century Galileans, water was not to be trifled with unless you were a deity or desperately clumsy. Walking on it, that ranked somewhere between blasphemy and the world's most public look-what-I-can-do moment. Rumors would soon flourish. Did a giant underwater spirit lend a hand, or was Jesus just the original stuntman? The local fishermen envisioned a dramatic showdown between faith and physics, complete with harp music and maybe a giant squid. And here's the kicker. The long-told story that Jesus walked unchallenged, unstuck, and unharmed. Turns out, The key to this aquatic masterpiece was that instead of water, Jesus was actually walking on a bed of enough lily pads to rival an oversized green carpet. Or so the legends would later humorously speculate. No one mentioned the trampoline-like effect of 10,000 water lilies cushioning every step. But hey, miracles like a good PR campaign are partly a matter of perspective. Historically speaking, while our ancestors loved to embellish stories with supernatural footnotes, the real miracle was more about the power of narrative spin and less about defying natural laws. Walking on water was the viral stunt of the era, spreading faster than early fish whispers and lasting longer than an awkward synagogue sermon. So, what do we take away from this aquatic footnote? If you ever find yourself tempted to take a casual walk on water, maybe consider that sometimes it's less about miracles and more about whether the lake has a well-grown field of water lilies beneath its surface. Because, after all, even miracles might enjoy a little soft landing. Picture this. Lake Galilee, circa 30 AD. Dawn breaks over the water with all the solemnity of a bard's poorly timed ballad. The sky is a mottled canvas of pink and gray, a smell of wet sandals mingling with the faint aroma of fish, and a suspiciously overcooked river rat drifting past. Our protagonist, Jesus, is assembling his 12 disciples like a basketball coach prepping an amateur team for the big game. But little do they know, this morning's main event isn't a sermon or a miracle marquee act. It's a gastronomic disaster about to unfold on the tranquil lake itself. Center stage? A humble bowl of noodles, aka the culinary tinderbox of the day. In this era, noodles were a rare delicacy, worming their way from mysterious eastern lands, rumored to cause everything from prophetic visions to spontaneous dancing fits if not prepared with obsessive, ritualistic care. The cooking of noodles was no casual affair. The boat's cook, clearly overqualified in fish roasting but woefully novice with pasta, performed a ceremony involving chanting, belly laughs, and a lot of splashing water for good measure. Disciples circled, nervously clutching fishing rods as if they could stab the offending food into submission. Rumors spread faster than loaves and fishes at a feeding frenzy concerning the noodles' authenticity. Was it made from wheat, barley, or suspiciously grainless sand? Was the water boiled with sacred herbs or just Lake Galilee's signature algae bouquet? Half the crew boycotted the meal, preferring to gnaw on dried figs and stare accusingly at the offending bowl. Tension simmered like a stew left on a stone for a month. Mid-bite, Peter felt an unusual wobble, not from seasickness, but from judgment. As Jesus calmly stood, cleared his throat, and did the unthinkable. He walked on the water, leaving behind a trail of confused noodles snaking in the wake. The disciples gasped, not because their master defied natural laws, but because the noodles had somehow escaped into the big blue. The grand twist? The noodles hadn't miraculously supported Jesus. They were utterly soggy and dissolved immediately upon contact with the water, leading to a soggy, unwelcome noodle soup sea. The miracle, it seemed, was less about defying physics and more about transforming a culinary catastrophe into a performance art piece. Historically, walking on water has been a metaphor for leadership and faith, but we can safely say, in this version, it turns out to be a desperate attempt to distract from inedible fish noodles. So, what's the real takeaway from this aquatic noodle fiasco? never trust a miracle meal cooked on a rocking boat, and always carry a backup snack that won't Picture it. A foggy morning on the Sea of Galilee, circa 33 AD, where sandals are the latest fashion, and sandals on water are, quite frankly, unheard of. The mist curls around fishing boats like a suspiciously persistent scarf, and somewhere, a particularly chatty disciple is already regretting volunteering to bring breakfast. What are we eating? Freshly caught fish, obviously. But not just any fish. These are the original, unbranded, biblical sea bass, straight from the divine seafood aisle, freshly plucked from watery depths under suspicious circumstances involving a miraculous catch. The air is thick with the tang of salt water, the faint aroma of morning dew mixed with the unmistakable odor of fish scales crunching between teeth, and that peculiar human noise we call chatter, mostly debates about who really saw Jesus walk on water and which disciple is least likely to drop his lunch into the lake. Alongside Jesus we have Peter, who looks uncertainly at the waves, as if expecting them to start singing sea shanties, and John, the ever-silent observer who probably can't decide whether he's impressed or severely skeptical. Our dish of aquatic fortune is, of course, the centerpiece, the fish themselves, amassing like the existential questions around eating miraculous seafood. Was it kosher? Was it caught by hook, crook, or divine intervention? And should one really trust a meal served fresh after one man conquered the laws of physics just moments earlier? Local fishermen have been quietly muttering superstitions, convinced that eating these fish without the proper ritual prayers might cause your sandals to spontaneously float away or, worse, lead to a prophetic fish burp. Tensions bubble beneath the surface, figuratively and literally, as the disciples debate the theological implications of eating fish that might technically be miracles and thus either cursed or blessed. Some insist on blessing the fish thrice, while spinning anti-clockwise to avoid evil fish spirits. Others declare it sacrilege to eat a fish that just witnessed a suspension of aquatic law. Meanwhile, Jesus blithely ignores the hullabaloo, teasingly walking on waves, setting the bar low for any future lunch line miracles. Suddenly, the peaceful breakfast scene morphs into chaos when Peter, nervously testing the waters, accidentally flings a fish that lands with a splash near an astonished crowd on shore. Cue the dramatic gasp and immediate speculation. Is this fish a sign from the heavens, or a disappointment from the culinary gods? Whispers spread about whether the fish was blessed twice or only once. Conspiracy theories about the freshness of the catch explode faster than the ripples in the water. The twist, turns out, the much-hyped fish fry was nothing more than a soggy fish sandwich, hastily assembled when the original plans for a divine banquet collapsed due to a fish shortage and rising tide. Even the miraculous walking on water was overshadowed by the disappointment of soggy bread and tepid fish. Probably not the miracle the crowd was expecting. Historically, fishermen in Galilee Warrens always fond of exaggeration, and local historians note that post-resurrection snack events were often hurried affairs accompanied by whispered tales of miracles that conveniently distracted from the culinary letdown. So what's the takeaway? If you find yourself invited to a meal featuring fish said to be touched by the divine, don't panic. Just pack plenty of bread and hold on to your sandals. Because even if Jesus walks on water, your lunch might just walk right out of your hands. Picture this. A calm night circa 30 AD, somewhere on the Sea of Galilee, with the moon playing peekaboo between some suspiciously well-groomed clouds. The air smells vaguely of fish, water lilies, and the faint aroma of sandals that have seen better days. Waves gently lap against the boat where Jesus and his motley crew of disciples are trying to catch some shut-eye after a day of preaching, healing, and probably some light administrative micromanaging of miracles. Enter the scene, a snack debate of epic proportions. Was it bread or fish that inspired the morale boost for the miraculous water walk? But more importantly, how do you walk on water without the proper miracle insurance? The night is thick with anticipation and the unmistakable sound of tired muttering. The moonlight glints off the water's surface with an irritating clarity, casting long shadows and making the water look suspiciously like a giant liquid sheet of glass, a fact that would make any ancient Jewish carpenter think twice before stepping off a boat. Jesus stands up. His sandals, if you squint, look suspiciously clean given the muddy shoreline they'd been near all day. The disciples lean in, simultaneously curious and mildly concerned, watching a man attempt to ignore every rule of physics known to fishermen and philosophers alike. Cue the tension. In an era when walking on water was usually reserved for the occasional deity or deluded mystic, this stunt was controversial. The concept baffled skeptics, thrilled believers, and left skeptics thrilled but with an itch to invent a handy phrase like optical illusion or mass hypnosis. Friends, enemies, and random passers-by debated if this was a genuine miracle, a parlor trick, or just really good stagecraft involving cleverly disguised hidden stepping stones. Because, let's be honest, even the internet wasn't invented yet, so rumors bred faster than locusts in a drought. The disciples, equipped with sidebar superstitions, don't look down, and an assortment of whispered prayers started to appreciate the fine art of not asking too many questions, mainly because the only thing safer than walking on water was not falling in during the attempt. Ancient ritual or not, the event spurred a flurry of activity. Fishermen whispered about buying flotation devices. Scribes debated publishing an updated version of Psalms titled The Literal Verses, and local dogs stopped barking out of pure existential confusion. But here's the twist. After a brief yet tension-filled promenade atop the liquid abyss, Jesus doesn't pull off a Michael Jackson spin or a tap dance finale. He simply steps back into the boat. No balloon animals, no fireworks, just a calm return to normalcy, as if to say, nah, that was just a warm-up. Historical footnote: accounts of water walking popped up sporadically across various cultures, but none quite captured the combination of theatrical panache, political savvy, and spiritual branding that this Galilean carpenter managed. Sure, Aristotle might have scoffed, skeptics might have grumbled, but the legend stuck, mostly because no one quite had the skill set to top a guy who casually ignored hydrodynamics. So what's the takeaway? If you're going to walk on water, keep it low-key. Picture this: early 1st century AD, somewhere on the Sea of Galilee, under that perfect Mediterranean sun that has ruined every last hairdo since time immemorial. The air is salty with a hint of fish and the unmistakable aroma of freshly caught miracles in progress. Small boats bob furiously, their wooden oars flailing like caffeinated gymnasts, and somewhere a disciple is slipping on a wet deck, adding unintended slapstick to the unfolding drama. Meet Jesus, carpenter turned water walker, surrounded by his loyal band of disciples who look less like destiny's chosen and more like a ragtag group desperately searching for the nearest floating Starbucks. Tonight's spectacle? Jesus defying every known physics textbook by stepping, not onto the choppy waves, turning nature's most practical water surface into his personal runway. The setting is sublime. A visual narrative bathed in golden hour light that filters through olive trees, casting elongated shadows on the terrifyingly wobbly, probably splinter-infested wooden vessels. The scent of damp wood mingles with sweaty anticipation, not to mention the manly musk of worn tunics and the occasional waft of tut-tutted fish guts. But before we crown him the patron saint of water aerobics, let's take a moment to appreciate the gravity, pun absolutely intended, of this aquatic anomaly. The disciples glance nervously, clutching their wooden oars like life vests, amidst whispered rumors that walking on water was either an epic sign of divine intervention or possibly an elaborate trick involving some very slippery sandals and a conveniently floating piece of a rather large piece of water lily. Underneath the hush, ancient superstitions bubble up like gum stuck to the soles of Roman sandals. Some feared that water was actually jealous of humans walking on its surface and might retaliate with freak waves or spontaneous fish jumps, while others insisted that only those with impeccable balance, or blessed rubber boots, could pull off such a feat without an embarrassing splash. The tension is palpable, thick as the mud at the lake's edge, as the crowd waits for miraculous or catastrophic consequences. But then, in a twist no one saw coming, except maybe the narrator, the miracle solves itself with a quiet, comedic grace. Jesus steps onto the water, glides a few paces, and then, slip. Down he goes, hands flailing like a toddler learning to swim, before standing up and laughing, turning the miracle into the oldest recorded walk-it-off moment in history. The disciples erupt in relieved laughter, some even attempting their own tentative water walks, only to discover that gravity and common sense still apply, much to the amusement of the local fish population. Historical footnote. While the story transcends religious text and folklore, scholars have debated whether this miracle was real, allegorical, or perhaps a case of an over-enthusiastic storyteller who misunderstood some impressive shallow water gymnastics. Regardless, the tale has left a legacy that makes aquaplaning cool centuries before the invention of the motorboat. So what's the takeaway from this soggy saga? Maybe it's that sometimes miracles don't have to be loud or miraculous. They can just be comfortably clumsy, quietly human, and best enjoyed with an audience ready to suppress their urge to videotape every minor stumble. And, if nothing else, remember, never underestimate the power of wet socks and an audience that believes in you, even if you do end up swimming after your own feet. Picture this. It's roughly 33 AD, somewhere on the Sea of Galilee. The sun is setting, casting a golden glow on the water that smells faintly of fish, sweat, and hopeful miracles. Enter Jesus, the carpenter turned crowd pleaser, ready to star in one of history's first viral stunts, walking on water. Spoiler alert, no waterproof sandals were involved. The atmosphere is thick with anticipation and maybe a bit of confusion. The disciples are crammed into a creaky wooden boat, a vessel that likely would have failed a modern safety inspection. The air is filled with the sound of gentle waves lapping, the occasional bird dive-bombing for dinner, and the low murmur of what one assumes were the earliest recorded heckles, mostly from Peter, who's both skeptical and mildly nauseous. Now, the water itself, not just any liquid expanse, but a lake infamous for turning casual swimmers into fish food. A thin layer of wind whisking across the surface adds an almost cinematic ripple effect, perfect for a miracle in desperate need of a spotlight. The food at the center of the evening's festivities? Well, let's call it the symbolic loaves and fishes. Not exactly dinner theater, more a modest picnic that somehow fueled a crowd large enough to start the original biblical flash mob. An assortment of what might have been day-old bread and very questionable fish, all gathering a suspiciously large congregation. Here's where historical absurdity strides in. According to some very serious ancient gossip, the miracle was less about faith and more about fishing pressure. Bystanders, perhaps bored or suspicious, started whispering that Jesus had too much time on his hands and not enough to do but try to sneak out of walking on crunchy gravel. In fact, there's evidence the disciples were performing an elaborate water balancing act for passers-by, a mix of early-stage parkour and the world's first aquatic flash mob. Oddly enough, Peter's attempt to join in ended with what historians lovingly call the original splash zone. As the tension of the water-walking saga builds, one can picture Jesus, perhaps tired of fishing and sermonizing, just deciding to inject some aquatic slapstick into the proceedings. The crowds? Distracted enough to ignore the fact that everyone was simultaneously debating whether they'd just witnessed a divine act or an elaborate stage trick. And now, the twist. Rather than a top-tier miracle, it turns out the trick was a clever use of an exceptionally thin sheet of floating algae, ancient biofilm that just happened to be stable that evening, giving a firm enough footing for someone light on their feet and the dramatic skill to match. The miracle? More botanical than biblical. Historically speaking, various ancient texts hint that the phrase walking on water might have been a colloquial expression akin to saying pulling off the impossible, not a literal aquatic stroll. In reality, it might have been a local pun, lost to millennia, but preserved in the arts of storytelling and dinner table debates. So what's the takeaway from this splashy escapade? If you ever feel pressured to perform miracles in front of a crowd, just remember, sometimes the stage is just a really slippery patch of algae. Walk cautiously, and maybe bring a good pair of waterproof sandals. After all, it's better to be called. Picture this. Circa 30 AD, Galilee. Twilight is gently dipping its toes into the Sea of Galilee, the waves rhythmically whispering secrets to the shore, the scent of fish and dusty sandals hanging thick in the salty air. Somewhere between sundown and divine intervention, an obscure carpenter named Jesus decides to take multitasking to a new level, walking on water, while apparently having zero regard for physics or common sense. The scene is anything but serene. Dimming natural light throws long shadows of a small fishing boat bobbing on what could rightfully be called the most lukewarm lake in history. Inside the boat, a gang of bewildered disciples huddle, their faces a blend of awe, confusion, and mild seasickness. Somewhere in the background, a mosquito buzzes with comedic timing, like a tiny stand-up comedian bombing on stage. And right at the center of our aquatic drama is our focus, not fish, bread, or loaves, but the water itself. Ordinary, clear, and suspiciously unimpressed by its visitor. For some reason, this water is about to become the stage for a miracle so understated it might as well be called a quiet scandal. before our heroic carpenter's feet meet the waves, there's an unspoken tension between natural law and supernatural entitlement. Ancient superstition would have painted the sea as a domain of chaos, a watery abyss reserved exclusively for fish, storms, and the occasional annoyed fisherman. Here, the idea of a man stepping lightly atop the surface was the sort of nonsense that got you a one-way ticket out of polite society, or worse, labeled a madman. And yet, defying all aquatic etiquette, he steps forward. 1 foot, then the other. With less fanfare than a turtle crossing a pond, but infinitely more historical clout, he ambles atop the sea. The disciples' jaws probably dropped so hard they flirted with gravity themselves. It's the original water-walking flash mob, minus the playlists and flash photography. Meanwhile, superstition hasn't gone anywhere. The disciples' panic improves exponentially. Could it be a phantom? A hallucination induced by dehydration and prolonged exposure to fish smells? Or perhaps an unrecorded early attempt at extreme performance art? The tension mounts, mixing fear with unspoken questions about physics, faith, and the dinner plans that definitely did not include sea strolls. Here's the kicker. While the spectacle is unfolding, nobody seems to think, hey, maybe we should adjust our grip on the oars because the boat is obviously next on the list for defying reality. Nope. Calm reigns in the tiny vessel, as if the sea-walking carpenter is the least unusual thing happening that evening. Talk about high standards for miraculous behavior. And then, plot twist worthy of the ancient gospel writers, a sudden gust of wind starts snickering at the scene like a mischievous child. Our hero begins to sink. Fear turns a bit literal, and water suddenly becomes an equal opportunity employer of miracles and near drownings. Spoiler alert, Jesus probably swam back up, but the moment serves as a charming lesson in humility, faith, and making sure your confidence doesn't outpace your buoyancy. Historically, water walking isn't exactly a well-documented athletic event outside of sacred texts and a few very imaginative Renaissance paintings. What we know is less about literal hydrodynamics and more about the metaphorical power of stepping out on faith, preferably fresh water with fewer fish. So, if you take one thing from this aquatic escapade, let it be this. Sometime picture this: dawn on the Sea of Galilee, circa early 1st century. The fishermen are yawning. Jesus is probably questioning his choice of sandals, and the water is, surprisingly, not at all stage-ready for the stunt about to unfold. The air smells mostly of fresh fish, with a suspicious hint of algae, accompanied by the distant bleating of confused goats and the ever-present chirping of disciples who still can't decide if this boat business is a good idea. Enter Peter, whose hesitation would redefine the phrase "walk on by." The stage, a wooden boat bobbing like a cork with a bad attitude. The star? Jesus, the miracle worker turned aquatic showman, about to prove physics wrong with the most serene water-walking performance history has never quite understood how to explain without dramatic music. Now, let's set the scene. The light is an awkward mix of dawn's soft glow and the unforgiving stare of a crowd that has already witnessed the multiplication of fish but remains skeptical, like expecting firework finales and getting sparkler flames instead. The soundscape? A delightful medley of lapping waves, nervous whispers, and a lone disciple attempting to tune a harp with evidently no experience. The center of attention is, naturally, the water itself, an unforgiving stage that does not appreciate unexpected footsteps. But what really steals the show is the paradoxical attire. Robes and sandals on water, the original wet look before it was ironic. Tension mounts like the rising tide. Peter's indecisive step sends metaphorical ripples that few could have predicted. And rituals? Well, the local superstition warns against walking on water unless you've passed the eyebrow-raising miracle test administered by a crowd capable of collective gasps and fainting spells. Meanwhile, the water's surface, far from a meek liquid canvas, seems to silently judge every step, whispering aquatic snark to the fish below. In a twist worthy of the ages, Peter actually manages a few shaky steps before gravity, social expectations, and perhaps an unspoken aquatic union vote conspire to send him plunging. Jesus, calm and collected, manages not to faceplant thanks to years of divine practice and probably very stable sandals. And the crowd, alternately stunned, inspired, and reconsidering their footwear choices for next Sunday's service. Historically, the incident is delightfully ambiguous. It mirrors the best kind of early stunt coordination mixed with a splash of faith and a dash of cosmic PR. Ancient texts do little to clarify the technique, leaving historians to speculate about divine wetsuits or perhaps just very buoyant sandals. The takeaway? When life throws you waves, put on your best sandals and try not to make a splash. Because sometimes miracles are just really committed power walks on water, proving that even the most unbelievable acts benefit from a touch of flair and a lot of confident striding. Cue the sound of gentle waves lapping against a rather muddy shore circa 30 AD, somewhere in the Sea of Galilee where sandals are the footwear of choice and walking on water is starting to become the talk of the town for reasons no one can quite believe. The air is thick with the scent of fresh catch, mostly fish, and the unmistakable aroma of unwashed fishermen who just finished a long day of nothing more suspicious than catching dinner. Meet Jesus, the original miracle man with a penchant for defying physics and a crowd that's half skeptical, half excited, and all in desperate need of a good story at their next family gathering. The food at center stage? Why, fish, naturally, because nothing says communal bonding like an impromptu fish fry after walking on water. The sun filters through the olive trees, casting a divine glow that's part hopeful, part squint-inducing, while nearby disciples debate if this is truly a miracle or just a very elaborate fish sales pitch. Now, before the waters part, tensions bubble up like overboiling pots over a fire. Mainly because water walking is a new local sensation that's causing both admiration and an epidemic of dramatic fainting spells among bystanders. Some elders whisper about ancient aquatic spirits offended by this breach of natural law, recommending sacrifices of the largest fish catch to appease their grumpy deities. Meanwhile, Peter, the ever-enthusiastic apprentice, prepares for his moment to replicate Jesus' feat, creating a spectacle of slipping, splashing, and occasional mutterings about the lack of waterproof sandals. The local fishermen, who pride themselves on keeping the sea sacred and dry, start plotting how to leverage this miracle into a lucrative business model. Licensed water walking tours, anyone? Suddenly, amidst the distractions, a twist unfolds. It turns out Jesus' walking on water was less about divine physics and more about strategically hopping on a cleverly submerged and surprisingly sturdy piece of driftwood cleverly camouflaged by the water's reflection. The crowd gasps, relieved and amused as the miracle transforms into the world's oldest magic trick, prompting one disciple to whisper that maybe faith needs a little less water and a lot more wood. Historically speaking, before waterproof shoes and turn-by-turn GPS, people were nothing if not creative in explaining inexplicable events. Ancient storytellers loved a good metaphor as much as a good prank, especially when it involved enhancing the reputation of a charismatic figure with slightly slippery benefits. So what? Were ancient miracles just early viral marketing? Maybe. The lesson here? When life gives you a lake, don't just float, walk on it, but maybe check for hidden logs beneath your feet before you sign up for the miracle tour. Picture this. Dawn breaks over the Sea of Galilee, circa 30 CE. The water is calm, the fishermen are bleary-eyed, and the scent of salt water mingles oddly with the lingering aroma of burnt fish sticks. Yes, the early morning catch is not just a meal here, it's the stuff of miracles, or, in today's story, a quiet fiasco. Enter Jesus, the protagonist casually defying aquatic physics, opting to turn water into not wine, but something far more slippery, himself walking atop the waves. The scene is lit by a low, golden sun struggling to pierce through a suspiciously foggy sky, promising ominous weather or, at the very least, soggy sandals. The chorus of gulls squawk judgmentally as boats creak, and a faint scent of fish guts and hoe-dried seaweed enlivens the air. On shore stands Peter, the ever-earnest disciple, nervously eyeing the water as if expecting the fish to sprout wings and hijack their humble vessels. And behind him, the rest of the disciples huddle, probably wishing their breakfast had been a bit more filling, or less reminiscent of something last seen floating by Caesar's palace kitchens. Now, the aquatic centerpiece of all this tension is decidedly simple. Fish. Not just any fish, mind you, but a catch that has seen better days, rumored among the crew to be blessed by the patience of Job but cursed with the culinary skills of an untrained shepherd. Fish is food, symbolism, survival, and, as it turns out, a source of anxiety rivaling the dozen other miracles in Jesus' resume. Here's where the absurdity bubbles. The fishermen have peculiar rituals. Before casting nets, some mutter prayers to Neptune's distant, underwhelming cousin, fearing the wrath of aquatic deities who might vandalize their catch. Others toss salt into the sea, not so much for preservation, but as an ancient, vaguely superstitious gesture to ensure the fish will be cooperative, or at least avoid mutiny. The mere sight of Jesus stepping onto the water causes a collective inhalation of breath that would have put the most seasoned Roman Senate to shame. As the waves lap calmly beneath him, Jesus strides with divine nonchalance. Peter, upon invitation to join, briefly considers test-driving his faith before spectacularly nosediving into what the subtitles might kindly describe as liquid humility. The disciples' expressions shift between awe and the distinct urge to Google How to Walk on Water 101 in Aramaic. But the climax here is the ultimate fish joke. Despite walking on their domain, the fish remain unimpressed. No sudden school formations, no celestial symphonies of flapping fins, just a mildly confused ripple as if thinking, Oh great, another guy showing off. Even the usual waterfowl seemed to sigh and fly away in search of better entertainment. Historically speaking, the Sea of Galilee was indeed a hub of fishing and trade, but there's no record of fish developing stage fright around walking humans. However, this story became a cornerstone for faith, improbability, and aquatic showmanship. Moral of the segment: when faced with fishy situations, don't walk on water. Just learn to swim with the absurdity. Because sometimes, even a quiet miracle can imagine it is a chilly evening just a few thousand years ago on the Sea of Galilee, where the water smells suspiciously like a mix of fresh fish, campfire smoke, and something one dares not identify. Our leading man, Jesus, is standing near the shore, surrounded by a cast of skeptical disciples, a dozen fish flapping semi-patiently, and a crowd whose expectations for miracles have officially been set quite high thanks to some previous headline acts involving wine and loaves. The spotlight is dim, cast by the setting sun whose refusal to hurry up might be the first real drama of the night. The food at the center of this aquatic spectacle? Not fish, surprisingly, but rather a metaphorical feast of faith, doubt, and a sprinkle of ancient wonder seasoned with a dash of confusion. At this point, the atmosphere buzzes with an uneasy mixture of salt spray, the faint aroma of damp wood, and the rustling of sandals, some worn, some hopeful, some destined to become legendary for reasons yet unknown. Now, hold onto your robes because here comes the tension. Walking on water sounds like a miracle, but let's be honest, we live in a world where fish flap, men row, and sandals sink. That means that Jesus' feet are conspicuously dry despite the surrounding liquid, immediately challenging any and all known principles of physics and common sense. One can almost hear the disciples' mental notes. Is this divine, a trick for extra sermon points, or just clever stagecraft? As the sun begins to dip, the disciples engage in what might be the earliest recorded case of mixed signals and conspiracy theories regarding footwear, waves, and water gravity. Superstitions abound, with one disciple suggesting they all grab some water and sprinkle it on their sandals just to be safe. Another wonders aloud if the whole event is a sign that next time, dinner should be ordered on dry land. The height of absurdity, however, is when Peter takes his own hesitant steps onto the water, causing a moment so suspenseful it competes with today's most nail-biting reality TV. Of course, Peter's brief, soggy lesson in faith ends with him sinking faster than the popularity of vegan fish recipes, prompting Jesus to step in, catch, and metaphorically dry dock his confidence. But here is the twist in the tale. The quiet miracle of the story that often gets lost. Despite all the grandiosity and fleet-footed spectacle, the crowd eventually decides the best course of action is probably just to row back home and have a nice dinner on solid ground, preferably something less slippery and more digestible than faith itself. A brief historical aside. While walking on water might be a highlight reel favored by scriptural narrators, the very notion is historically uneasy because ancient boaters had learned to accept the perilous fluidity of their vessels and the water beneath. Claiming feet that defy sinking is akin to suddenly claiming a camel can fly, entertaining but suspicious if you're an ancient fisherman. Morally, this episode teaches us something startling and timeless. never underestimate the power of dry shoes in a wet world. Because if history or miracles have taught us anything, picture this. Early morning Sea of Galilee, circa 30 AD, where the air smells of salt, sweat, and existential confusion. A motley crew of disciples, cloaked in linen robes that probably haven't been washed since the last Passover, are huddled in a small wooden boat. The waves gently slap the hull as if the lake itself is taking bets on what absurd miracle might happen next. Enter Jesus, not with a fishing net, but with the audacity to walk on water. Apparently the era's equivalent of nailing the viral stunt video. The first rays of dawn punch through the fog, casting eerie shadows on faces that range from awe to sheer panic. Meanwhile, the scent of fish frying somewhere on shore teases the senses, promising a post-miracle snack that might be less miraculous and more questionable. The scene is set for a biblical joyride across the wet stage. The atmosphere is electric. Damp, salty sea breeze meets the indignant chirps of unseen waterfowl as ripples shimmer like a cheap magic trick. Jesus, barefoot and looking casual as can be, tiptoes on the lake like it's a stone path in a maternity sandal commercial. Around him, the disciples clutch the boat's edge, some whispering prayers, others probably wondering if they accidentally fell into a fever dream or early experimental theater. Meanwhile, the nearby fishing boats creak and groan, smelling faintly of old nets and the collective anxiety of men who have learned that water might sometimes be the last place you want to be. What's truly absurd is not just the walking on water spectacle, but the awkward post-event food politics. According to biblical lore, and trust us, we checked, Jesus and his followers after this feat were treated to a humble breakfast of grilled fish, allegedly just caught and presumably unspoiled, but history never tells us about the microbial risks of that lakeside meal. This fish becomes the unsung protagonist in our aquatic saga, symbolizing survival, fellowship, and the culinary gamble that might have ended as food poisoning drama rather than divine celebration. Tension simmers as the disciples debate not just the miracle, but the logistics of fish preparation by open water. Was it grilled over holy fire? Did they have graphite or a spit? What if a sneaky cat stole a bite? Suspicion swirls because in the 1st century, fish were not just fish. They were delicacies, currencies, and yes, potential carriers of ancient foodborne disasters. Some disciples, reportedly, even examined their fish suspiciously, looking for spiritual signs that maybe the catch was blessed or cursed by the lake itself. The twist? After all the solemn gazes and cautious nibbles, the fish turned out perfectly edible. Better yet, the post-miracle meal sparked an unintended side legend. That Jesus' talent wasn't just in defying physics, but possibly in choosing the safest seafood source in history. Local lore and slightly dubious sources tells us the fish was grilled well enough to silence stomach grumbles for days, proving that sometimes the quietest miracle is a well-cooked lunch. The disciples left the shore not only awestruck but also well-fed, which, as any historian will tell you, is the true miracle of any ancient gathering. Historically speaking, walking on water is almost certainly metaphorical, with real-life roots in the perilous navigation of small lakes by fishermen. But the idea of a communal meal post-miracle is as authentic as it gets. Because nothing bonds humans like shared protein. It also highlights an ancient truth. Without proper fire and seasoning, even a miracle can be overshadowed by indigestion. So the grand moral here? If you ever find yourself tempted to walk on water, bring a grill and some catch, because miracles may dazzle. But dinner keeps the disciples quiet and the legend alive. And remember, picture this. Dawn breaks on the peaceful waters of Lake Galilee, circa 30 AD, and instead of the usual morning fishing hustle, the air is thick with the scent of slightly overcooked tilapia and impending divine confusion. The fishermen, a ragtag band of sandals and robe wearers, prepare for their daily catch, blissfully unaware that today, history will literally walk on water, and not because they were very, very good swimmers. The scene is set with the dim blush of early sunlight shimmering off the gentle waves, mingling with the faint, not-so-pleasant aroma of last night's fish stew still lingering on a few unfortunate garments. A chorus of croaking frogs and the occasional splash underscore the soundtrack of tranquility, soon to be disrupted. Enter Jesus, the carpenter cum miracle worker. Stage left, ready to make water walking the hottest new party trick in Judea. But before the big splash, let's talk food. Fish, naturally. This being a lakeside community, fish was less a delicacy and more a survival tactic. The catch, often sporting an alarming variety of scales, fins, and dubious smells, was treated with the reverence and suspicion that only a people who might regularly end up eating the local equivalent of a swimming garbage can muster. Now, the absurdity deepens. In this era, food rituals involving fish were less about cuisine and more about cautionary rites thinly veiling paranoia. Fish had a reputation for causing mysterious illnesses, strange dreams, and occasionally sudden prophetic visions, which may or may not have been blamed on too much fermented grape juice the previous night. The fishermen recited incantations and performed bizarre exorcisms on their nets, lest the fish carry any water demons from the murky depths into their very bowls. As Jesus steps out onto the water, defying centuries of hydrological understanding, the crowd watches, mouths agape, some clutching their fish sandwiches as if to remind themselves of earthly things to hold on to. The tension is palpable. Is this miracle a symptom of supernatural blessing, or just an elaborate publicity stunt? Was Jesus trying to distract from the fish epidemic that had been plaguing the village's Friday night fish fry? The twist? As the story goes, Jesus calmly approaches the disciples stranded in their boat, suffering from a bad case of sea leg-induced panic. But, unbeknownst to them, the walking on water was actually a cunning solution. Jesus borrowed the local fisherman's ancient waterproof sandals prototype, cleverly designed for water balance, which unfortunately failed to catch on for obvious reasons. Historically speaking, the story of Jesus walking on water probably traveled the rumor mill like wildfire, because ancient people loved a good fish tale, and dolphins were decidedly unimpressed by placid lakes. Water walking as a miracle fits snugly into the tradition of exaggerated storytelling, where carpenters become water-walking demigods, and fishermen find themselves reevaluating their life choices. So, what did we actually learn from this aquatic escapade? Never underestimate the power of a good pair of sandals, or the community's capacity for fish-related paranoia. And remember, when you see someone walking on water, maybe check if it's sandals or just slippery fish scales beneath those feet. Picture this. A foggy morning on the Sea of Galilee, roughly 2,000 years ago. The sun is just waking up. birds are chirping, and a bunch of fishermen are squinting suspiciously at their nets as if expecting a fish conspiracy to unfold any second now. This is no ordinary day. This is the day Jesus allegedly decided to turn fish into a feast, all while rehearsing what would become the world's quietest miracle. The air is thick with the smell of water mixed faintly with fish that probably could have exaggerated their own importance in the ecosystem. The waves lazily lap the wooden boats that bob like ancient rickety bath toys. Our key players, Jesus himself, Peter, and a gaggle of equally damp and hungry apostles, each more starving and skeptical than the next. The day's bounty, a modest haul of fish. The star ingredient poised for salvation or sabotage, depending on which disciple you asked. But before Jesus steps in, the fishermen perform their usual ritual, a mix of prayer, cautious casting of nets, and an awkward silence that screams desperation. Floating somewhere between faith and fishmeal, these men are about to witness a miracle that nobody quite understands, and everybody later spectacularly misinterpreted. Now, turn the dial to absurdity. Imagine if these fishermen had been subject to the wild superstitions of their time, where a bad catch meant the gods were cranky, or worse, the fish were cursed because someone forgot to leave a proper offering to the deity of the lake. The apostles might have instantly suspected that a rival sect, or even the Romans, had sprinkled some mystical bad luck into the water, brewing paranoia thicker than the morning fog. And if the fish looked even remotely off, you can bet the gossip mill was turning at full steam. Did you see that fish? It was definitely eyeballing Peter like it wanted to take over the world. Even the act of actually catching the fish was a bizarre blend of superstition and slapstick. Nets thrown with the precision of a blindfolded juggler, fingers crossed, and the obligatory muttering of ancient fishy incantations that roughly translate to "please don't be cursed." The tension peaks when the haul finally turns out surprisingly ample. The apostles stare in disbelief as Jesus calmly starts instructing them to break bread and share the catch. But here's the punchline. Despite the miraculous abundance, nobody actually talks about the fish much again, as if the fish were just a setup for the real show, walking on water itself. Turns out, the fish harvest was the quiet warm-up act, overshadowed forever by the bolder, wetter headline of Jesus literally defying physics. Historically speaking, fish were a staple of Galilean diets, and also a nifty symbol for early Christians. Because nothing says divine intervention like turning your dinner into a theological metaphor. Scholars suspect that this tale helped early believers feel a bit smug about their humble fish sticks, proving that even a soggy snack could be spiritual sustenance. Moral of the story? It is the year zero. Give or take a few years because meticulous record-keeping was obviously out of style on the serene Sea of Galilee, famed not just for its fish, but for the impending aquatic oddity about to unfold. Picture this, a gentle midday haze, fishermen bickering over nets that might as well be made of spaghetti, and sandals splashing in water that smells faintly of fish and questionable hygiene. Enter Jesus of Nazareth, the carpenter turned itinerant philosopher, whose footwear was about to meet the impossible. The scene is set on a boat rocking gently like a teetering toddler, surrounded by a crowd buzzing with expectant whispers and the occasional squawk of an annoyed gull. The food at center stage? Not a dish, but rather the literal water itself, slippery, unruly, and thoroughly undrinkable. The atmosphere, a mix of salty breeze, squished fish scales, and that awkward tension only a crowd witnessing a man attempting to defy basic physics can generate. As the disciples watch, some clutching their fishing gear like security blankets, others squinting skeptically, the air thickens with a cocktail of faith, doubt, and envy. Because nothing says divine favor like walking on something that everyone else is failing to master. Adding to the tension is an undercurrent of very human superstition. In a world where miracles were currency, skepticism was the default. Was Jesus blessed with actual celestial plumbing skills, or simply suffering from buoyant delusions? Aquatic rumors swirled as quickly as the waves themselves, fueled by whispers of secret sandals crafted by heavenly cobblers, or miraculous waterproofing rituals involving olive oil and whispered prayers. The disciples debated quietly. Was this a sign of messianic power, or just an elaborate aquatic magic trick better suited for a seaside fair? Then came the climax, the moment Jesus took a confident step onto the water, sending ripples through the crowd and spawning countless retellings of the event better than any campfire ghost story. Reality, however, had a humble sense of humor. The water didn't part dramatically, nor did it sparkle with divine glitter. Instead, it held steady, quietly wet, as if reminding everyone that miracles might be less about grand spectacle and more about steady faith, and probably good balance. The real bombshell. It turns out walking on water was less about defying physics and more about a subtle lesson in confidence and keeping your sandals dryish. Ancient texts, after all, failed to mention wet socks or the awkward splash sound that surely accompanied each step. Historically speaking, the Sea of Galilee was more known for sudden storms and less for miraculous strolls, making this aquatic feat the original viral sensation. So, what modern lesson do we draw from this watery escapade? Perhaps it's that miracles don't always involve fireworks or parting seas. Sometimes they're just about not falling flat on your face in front of a skeptical crowd. And, if nothing else, next time you're near a pond, remember, faith might just keep you upright over the muck, or at least give you a great story to tell at your next dinner party. Picture a windy day on the Sea of Galilee, the year approximately 30 AD, where the sun shines bright enough to make sandals look like bad investments, and the local fishermen grumble about the one thing they hate more than rough seas: Jesus' new water-walking hobby. Our main act? Jesus himself, sporting sandals optional, defying physics and probably a few laws of common sense by strolling across choppy waters like it was a neighborhood stroll in Nazareth. Around him, a motley crew of confused disciples trying to reconcile their belief system with the very definition of slippery logic. The air buzzes with salty sea spray and the faint scent of fish. Ironic, considering the miraculous spectacle about to unfold. The fish seem unbothered. After all, they have bigger concerns than a man making the water his personal catwalk. Everyone's eyes are riveted on the glistening surface, where the absurdity of walking on liquid threatens to eclipse every fishing tale ever told. And right there, the food of this aquatic odyssey. A humble basket of stale bread, the only true anchor to reality, amidst this soggy spectacle. Tension ripples through the crowd like a poorly tied sandal strap. The disciples debate whether the water's surface tension has been code-engineered or if Jesus just really hates boats today. Whispers of ancient superstitions float by. like the one claiming that walking on water makes you an automatic candidate for seasickness, or worse, social exile from the Sea of Galilee Sailing Club. Meanwhile, Peter attempts his own trial walk, wobbling like a toddler on a tightrope, before conceding that faith apparently has a time limit, and maybe a waterproof guarantee isn't included. The stakes couldn't be higher, or the risk of public humiliation greater. Suddenly, the miraculous moment culminates with Jesus calmly walking the watery runway, turning a few heads and causing unexpected envy among local amphibians. But here's the twist. While the crowd gasps at the miracle, the fish below shrug and continue with their day, oblivious to the holy foot traffic. No angels descended, no thunderclaps, just a quiet, watery commute that redefines multitasking. Historically speaking, walking on water probably came from an exaggerated fishing story, amplified like an ancient game of Chinese whispers crossed with divine marketing. Yet it sticks in the cultural consciousness, proving that a little water and a lot of faith make excellent story ingredients. So, what have we learned from this wet and wild episode? Picture it. A moonlit evening on the Sea of Galilee, circa 30 AD, where the air is fragranced not by roses but by a curious cocktail of fish scales, soggy sandals, and the faintest hint of sandalwood incense. Our protagonist, Jesus of Nazareth, part carpenter, part miracle worker, and full-time walking puzzle, steps boldly onto the scene. Around him, his bewildered disciples paddle anxiously in a rickety boat that looks like it was cobbled together by a committee that couldn't decide on planks or reeds. Tonight's hot topic? Not theology, nor politics, but the age-old maritime mystery. Can one really walk on water without turning into a soggy mess or a viral sensation in the ancient world? The tension is palpable. The disciples whisper superstitions about water spirits, curses for those who dare defy nature, and the Greek legends about river gods who notoriously hog all the best swimming spots. Jesus, allegedly, is about to break the cosmic ballet of liquid physics, much like a teenager smashing dad's vintage pottery purely to see what falls apart first. Meanwhile, back on shore, local fishermen snack on salty fish bread, occasionally glancing at the scene like it's some low-budget spectacle of a guy who's maybe had a little too much wine. The ritual itself is an absurd ballet. Jesus steps lightly, almost theatrically, his sandals gliding on the surface like some ancient version of an ice skater sponsored by faith. Behind the scenes, the disciples are having a silent panic attack, measuring his odds like gamblers staring at a roulette wheel rigged by mysterious forces. Then, the twist. Jesus doesn't sink. Instead, he strolls calmly toward them, casting an expression somewhere between mild surprise and I told you so. The boat rocks gently, the fishermen scratch their heads, and the rumors spread faster than a desert wildfire about the guy who literally walked over the water because obviously he missed the boat, or invented it. Historically, skeptical minds might point out this story's metaphorical layers, psychedelic trance states, or perhaps just an ancient fisherman's tall tale with a good punchline. But no matter the explanation, it remains one of the quietest miracles, because you never heard the water screaming as he walked on it. So what's the takeaway? If you're ever caught between faith and physics, pick faith, but maybe keep a life jacket handy just in case. Picture this. The Sea of Galilee, Approximately 2,000 years ago, on a day suspiciously lacking in social distancing. The air is crisp, the water eerily calm, and the faint smell of roasted fish wafts through the air like an ancient food truck's finest special. Our lead actor, not Jesus yet, but a glorified parking lot for fish, aka a small patch of water treated like holy real estate by fishermen and philosophers alike. Sunlight dapples down, casting cinematic shadows, as a fleet of fishing boats bob lazily, their occupants discussing everything from taxes to the best way to fillet a carp without ruining the ambiance. Enter Jesus and his ensemble cast of apostles, each with a personality distinguishable only by beard length and confusion levels. The food at the center of this watery drama isn't a feast or a miracle meal. It's a humble fish, allegedly the reason Jesus thought walking on water was a good idea, or at least a good headline. Tension builds as the fishermen prepare their nets with the reverence of a master chef, selecting the perfect garnish. The water's surface reflects morning light and teenage doubts about walking on water. Every splash, every squawk of a nearby seagull amplifies the anticipation. Local superstitions dictate that touching the water without permission from Poseidon or a suitably grumpy lake deity invites bad luck, broken sandals, and embarrassing moments involving involuntary swimming. Quirky rituals abound. Some apostles sip water cautiously. Others recite strange psalms that roughly translate to, "May we not sink today." And one unnamed fisherman prepares a makeshift flotation device from what suspiciously looks like a giant loaf of bread. Paranoia mounts when a particularly slippery fish almost slips away, causing a mini aquatic meltdown, which Jesus watches with an expression somewhere between mild amusement and, "Really, guys?" Then comes the twist. Jesus steps out, not on a sea of divine approval, but on a jittery crowd's consensus that maybe faith does propel you over water, or that the shore is just closer than it looks. Spoiler alert, the loaf of bread was less useful than promised, and the fish? It turns out to be just a fish. No miraculous powers attached other than inspiring centuries of dietary debates. Historically speaking, fish was the dietary cornerstone of the Galilean economy, revered more for its protein content than any theological implications. But apparently, it also served as the first PR stunt for walking on water, proving that even miracles need a solid fishy backstory. So, what's the takeaway? Always check your footwear, trust your instincts, and remember that if someone walks on water, it's probably less about celestial power and more about not wanting to clean soggy sandals. The year is approximately 30 AD, place, the Sea of Galilee, the original outdoor swimming pool where the water is not heated and the fish are definitely judging you. The scene opens on a breezy evening, distant twilight turning the water dark, punctuated by the occasional splash and the inadvertent yelp of a disciple who just discovered that sandals are not flotation devices. Jesus, having just fed 5,000 with what can only be described as ancient street food of questionable provenance, now faces the ultimate test. Walking on water, a feat so audacious it makes modern-day balance beam champions look like toddlers taking their first steps. The atmosphere is thick with saltwater mist, the faint smell of charred fish and humility, and the soft murmurs of bewildered apostles trying to rationalize what is clearly science fiction in sandals. The lighting is natural twilight, with a divine touch of cinematic glow provided by what we can only assume is heavenly spotlighting, because nothing says miraculous like perfect golden hour light. Our key players are Jesus, the serene Messiah; Peter, the disciple known for impulsive enthusiasm and sink-or-swim experiments; and a small boat resembling a floating coffin momentarily turned into a VIP lounge. The food at the center of the surrounding fiasco is leftover fish and bread, now more symbolic than edible, lingering like a metaphysical mid-meal snack that nobody really wants to touch again after the miracle. Historically, water walking doesn't usually involve footwear. However, here it involved heavy sandals that, according to rumored apocryphal texts, may have patented the first slip-proof soles. As tension mounts, the apostles whirl between genuine awe and a practical debate about hypothermia and insurance claims. Peter, the ever-daring handyman, attempts his own aquatic adventure, but quickly becomes the poster child for the phrase, "try and fail spectacularly," plunging beneath waves with all the grace of a stone. The boat creaks as the disciples drown their sarcasm in dry fish and watery wine, whispers of potential inebriation mixing with theological musings. This is less a walking miracle and more a failing water ballet choreographed by desperation and faith. The twist comes unexpected. Jesus calmly pulls Peter from the water, not with a lecture, but with a sarcastic quip about maybe sticking to fishing and keeping the sandals dry next time. The crowd rejoices not only at survival, but the snarky comeback, proving that miracles are better delivered with a wink. In true historical context, walking on water has sparked endless debate among scholars, theologians, and over-enthusiastic Sunday school teachers, none of whom have ever attempted it without a handy life preserver nearby. It remains the only event where walking is less about steps and more about symbolic crossover from the mundane to the divine, a quiet miracle with an undercurrent of practical comedy. So, what is the moral of this watery saga? If you're going to walk on water, remember, bring sandals with grip, a sense of humor, and the good fortune of a patient savior ready to pull you out when you inevitably take the plunge. Picture it. Galilee, roughly 2,000 years ago, under the sweltering Mediterranean sun where sandals were mandatory, but common sense optional. The lake laps lazily. Birds squawk nation-specific versions of gossip, and somewhere in the murky distance, a man is getting ready to perform what historians now dub the first aquatic traffic jam. The star of our story? Not Jesus, surprisingly, but the humble fish. Actually, multiple fish, who were about to become unwitting participants in the first recorded miracle-turned publicity stunt. The smell? A pungent cocktail of wet linen, sweaty sandals, and something suspiciously resembling dried fish, because miracles have a scent, and it usually involves seafood. The sounds? A casual mix of fishermen grumbling, reeds rustling, and a crowd whose excitement dance fluttered between devotional awe and the perennial fear that walking on water was a Hail Mary bet gone terribly wrong. Enter Jesus and his disciples. Characters as colorful as a Renaissance painting gone slightly off-kilter. There's Peter, always ready to try anything that sounds like an impulsive adventure, and Mary Magdalene, who's probably rolling her eyes and questioning her life choices. And then, of course, the fish, a suspiciously cooperative bunch who, by most accounts, had absolutely no clue about their cameo role in defining physics as we ignorantly understand it. Now, hold on to your sandals, because this is where things get fun. In a bizarre ritual known only slightly better by skeptical scholars than a cook attempting soufflé for the first time, the act of walking on water was as much about showmanship and aquatic PR as it was about actual theology. Legend has it that a few disciples attempted to mimic the act, resulting in a soggy, embarrassing tantrum that put their sandals firmly in the lost to the lake category. The lake was reportedly less amused. Paranoia reared its head in the form of conspiracy theories that the fish had been bribed. Why else would they swim underfoot instead of nibbling on the disciples' toes? Some speculated that the entire event was orchestrated by a cabal of fishermen looking to boost fish sales, cleverly disguised as divine intervention. Fast forward to the twist. Jesus does not simply walk on water in elegant, impervious strides. He actually freezes the surface just enough to stay upright while simultaneously offering a masterclass in crowd control and media savvy. The water, in essence, becomes an unwitting participant in one of history's quietest miracles. A miracle so subtle, it barely caused a ripple. Barely more than a very calm water aerobics session gone divine. Historically speaking, water walking myths predate Jesus, but no one quite did it with his combination of logistics, crowd control, and snack release timing to create maximum effect with minimal splash. All of which begs the eternal lesson. When life gets you drowning in problems, just remember you might be one shallow puddle, or a well-timed miracle, away from walking on water. The sun dips below the Sea of Galilee around 30 AD, casting an idyllic golden glow on a gathering of somewhat bewildered disciples and their increasingly confident leader, Jesus. Imagine the scene. The gentle lap of waves, the occasional squawk of an offended seagull, and a boat rocking enough to inspire minor panic attacks, but not quite enough to qualify as a disaster movie. The air smells faintly of fish, sweat, and the universal scent of outdoor sandals that have seen too many dusty mornings. This is history's quiet setup for arguably the first recorded instance of water achieving a promotion from aquatic annoyance to celestial catwalk. Leading this aquatic renaissance is Jesus himself, the man about to treat physics like a mildly inconvenient suggestion. Tonight's main event isn't fish or loaves, though those always come with their own miraculous complications, but water. Yes, water. That slippery liquid that has caused more awkward slips and embarrassing saints than one might expect. His audience? A motley crew of confused fishermen, sleepy apostles, and at least one guy probably wondering if he should have stayed on land knitting or sharpening his fishing nets instead. The tension in the air is thick enough to slice with a fishbone. There's a murmur of a disbelief, mixed with the romantic hope that maybe, just maybe, the guy who casually turned water into wine can now make water less wet. Whispers float. Is he about to step on what has been the world's most inconvenient liquid since the dawn of time? Are they about to witness a cosmic prank or a bona fide miracle? The local superstitions don't help. Rumors circulate about water spirits feeling ignored lately, and possibly staging a splashy comeback. In true ancient fashion, the rituals involved are as convoluted as they are underdocumented. According to some early historical echoes, a chant may have been murmured, probably something like "Submerge no more, O fluid floor," though historians can't confirm this exact phrase. largely because nobody wrote it down for fear of sounding ridiculous. One can imagine Jesus adjusting his sandals, looking out over the water with a mix of determination and the kind of calm assurance that only comes from decades of occasional carpentry and a deep familiarity with parables involving fish and less thandry feet. Then, the moment. The unlikely and undeniably quiet miracle. Jesus steps onto the water. The boat stops rocking, the dawn of supernatural water walking begins, and the disciples' jaws collectively drop, which is appropriate given that a few did not pack their dental kits. Not one splash follows. Not a single ripple betrays this physics-defying feline graceful walk. It's oddly anticlimactic. No thunderclaps, no angels singing backup vocals. Just a man and water entering a mutually accepted truce. Historical context tells us that while the Gospels immortalized this moment, the logistics were likely less cinematic and more about symbolic storytelling. Walking on water was a metaphor long admired and debated by theologians and skeptics alike. The supernatural step was probably a narrative device aimed at bolstering faith in an era that appreciated a good story more than aquatic stunts. So what's the takeaway here in our age of digital miracles and viral videos? Maybe the lesson is this: when life gets overwhelming and the waves threaten to drown your sense of humor and belief, just remember that sometimes the quietest miracles are the ones that don't make a splash. Literally. As our tale draws to a close, we find ourselves reflecting on humanity's peculiar obsession with the illusion of control. After all, who could deny the absurdity of thinking we could reign supreme over the animal kingdom? Time and again, we've tried to assert dominion over our furry and feathered friends, and yet they remain the true masters of chaos. Remember the infamous tale of the Great Hamster Uprising of 1821. While we were busy prancing around in top hats and monocles, our unsuspecting hamsters plotted in their cages, only to come out for an audacious revolt during the annual cheese festival. Humans called it a party. The hamsters called it a strategy session. And as we dive deeper into history's treasure trove of animal vengeance, we can't overlook the infamous cats of ancient Egypt. They may have been worshipped as deities, but beneath that velvety, purring facade, they were clearly plotting a feline coup against their ungrateful human subjects, reminding us that the moment you hand a cat a throne, they'll likely use it to launch their newest line of high-fashion catnip accessories, rather than shower you in divine favor. It's a disconcerting readjustment, isn't it? In this grand narrative where dogs eagerly wag their tails as if they are celebrating interspecies treaties with humans, we must ask, are they really reveling in our affection, or plotting a retaliatory strike because we thought they were good boys for years, while we ignored their dreams of ruling the living room? Surely those floppy ears disguise a grand scheme or two. Just look at the dear Fido on the couch, tail swinging like a metronome. Perhaps he's not wagging in ecstasy but winding up for the greatest rebellion of all time, the doggy revolution, where assertive woofs drive home the point that the humans just drew in the sand may not even be true boundaries. In conclusion, as we retreat back from this bewildering sea of absurdity, let us remember that when that delightful pooch greets you at the door with a tail-wagging flourish, it might not be a heartfelt welcome after all, but rather a declaration of war and the beginning of negotiations for a lifetime supply of treats in exchange for their ungrieved servitude. So, the next time you feel the urge to dictate the whims of your furry friend, just ponder this. Maybe, just maybe, the dog isn't wagging his tail. He's winding up. And as we close the curtain on this quiet miracle of faith and reassurance, we're left with a simple truth. In the grand scheme of life, it's very possible we are just mere extras in the undeniable blockbuster of animal antics. Remember, the next time a bird lands on your window ledge, they might just be rehearsing their Broadway debut called Avian Uprising, the musical. When it comes to the intricate dynamics of man and beast, prepare for an encore you didn't sign up for.